So I received a few questions about my last video, the truth about sex. So I thought I'd put a video together answering these questions. So the first question is, if an ordered sexual act needs to account for procreation, then does that mean a person who is barren or infertile cannot have sex? Second question is, does this mean I can't use contraceptives such as condoms and the birth control pill? Me and my spouse can't financially afford to support any more children. What, are we supposed to pop out kids like rabbits who we can't even support? First off, these are very, very, very good questions, and I'd be happy to answer them, so I'm going to answer them. So both these questions are fundamentally based on a misconception. The misconception is that every ordered sexual act must result in the procreation of a child. But like I said, this is a misconception, so let's try to clear up this misconception. It is true that one of the requirements of an ordered sexual act is accounting for the procreative aspect of sexual intercourse. So what do you do when you account for something? Well, you consider it, you regard it, it's part of the equation. It plays a part in the decision-making process. So accounting for the procreative aspect of sex is nothing more than making it part of the equation in a way that does not suppress it. So, it is not a requirement that the sexual act must result in the procreation of life, but it is a requirement that the sexual act must account for the procreation of life. So that brings us to the first question. If an ordered sexual act needs to account for the procreation of life, then does it mean a person who is barren or infertile should not have sex? So let's clear up the misconception. Like I said, it is not a requirement that the sexual act must result in the procreation of a child. It must only account for the procreation of life. So it is not true that a person who is barren or infertile should not have sex. But how do we account for the procreation of life in this scenario? In this scenario, where one of the spouses are infertile, being open to life is how we account for the procreative aspect. If someone is infertile or barren, that person should not have sexual intercourse if he or she is not open to life. However, if that person is open to life, he or she is easily capable of accounting for the procreative aspect of sexual intercourse. How would they be open to life if he or she is infertile? Well, maybe by some miracle from God. A perfect example of this is Abraham and Sarah in the Old Testament in Genesis. Sarah was barren, but yet Abraham and Sarah desired a son, and by God's grace they got one. Like I said, if a person is infertile, it is still very easy to account for the procreative aspect of sex. All it takes is the openness to life. So why can't I use contraceptives? I can still be open to life while using a condom or the pill. Why is this any different than someone who is infertile? This is a good question. Some people might see being barren or infertile as a blessing because they can have sex whenever they want without the consequence of conceiving a child. But this is a disordered perspective. What does God say? Is it a blessing to have sex as much as you want without the consequence of children? Or is it a blessing to have and raise children? Anyone who says it is a blessing to be barren or infertile has their desires mixed up. Ask any mother. The true blessing is the gift of a child. The fertile person who wishes to be infertile or barren is wishing against God's blessings. The barren person who wishes to be fertile is wishing for the blessings of God. So now we have 4 scenarios to look at. The person who is barren and says it is a blessing to be infertile. The person who is barren and wishes to be fertile. The person who is fertile and wishes to be barren. The person who is fertile and says it is a blessing to be fertile. 2 of these scenarios account for the procreative aspect of sexual intercourse, but the other 2 do not. Why? Because the person who is barren and wishes to be fertile, and the person who is fertile and says it is a blessing to be fertile, are in tune with God's blessings of fertility, and therefore account for the procreative aspect of sex. So the person who is barren and says it is a blessing to be infertile, and the person who is fertile and wishes to be barren are not in tune with God's blessings of fertility, and therefore do not account for the procreative aspect of sex. So, which scenario do contraceptives lie under? Well, they lie under the person who is fertile and wishes to be barren. Well, the question goes, I don't wish to be barren, I just can't afford another child, and that's why I'm using contraceptives. Well, this leads directly into question number 2. Does this mean I can't use contraceptives such as condoms and the birth control pill? Me and my spouse can't financially afford to support any more children. Are we supposed to pop out kids like rabbits, who we can't even support? First off, yes, this does mean we can't use artificial contraceptives such as condoms and the birth control pill. But this does not mean we have to pop out kids like rabbits. Again, we must clear the misconception. It is not a requirement that the sexual act must result in the procreation of a child. It must only account for the procreation of a child. But how do we account for the procreative aspect in this scenario? In this scenario, natural family planning is the way we account for the procreative aspect. Many people never heard of natural family planning, or NFP for short, but it's actually a very effective form of birth control if used correctly. In fact, sources say that NFP has a 99.5% effective rating, right behind condoms, which is a 99.8% effective rating. So what exactly is NFP? Natural family planning is a method of avoiding conception by which sexual intercourse is restricted to the times of a woman's menstrual cycle when ovulation is least likely to occur. Basically, you're only having sexual intercourse during times the mother is naturally infertile. So why does NFP account for the procreative aspect of sex and artificial contraceptives do not? What is the difference? Basically, the difference between NFP and artificial contraceptives is that NFP cooperates with the blessings of fertility we receive from God, while contraceptives suppress the blessings of fertility we received from God. So let's get a visual on this. Let's say this represents a certain time frame of a woman's fertility. This might look like a woman's natural fertility cycle, where the blue represents the woman's fertility periods and the gaps represents the periods of infertility. Now this might look like a woman's fertility on birth control pills. In words, the woman is creating herself to be infertile and in effect completely suppressing her natural blessings of fertility. Now she might come off the pill in order to conceive a child, which might look like this. In words, the woman is deciding when she is fertile and when she is not, and in effect still suppressing her natural blessings of fertility. With the use of condoms, the same model holds true. The couple is still deciding when to use the gift of fertility, thereby suppressing the natural blessings of fertility. When we compare these two models, it is quite a clear comparison that God's blessings are being very suppressed with the use of artificial contraceptives. But NFP works in cooperation with a woman's natural fertility cycle, and thereby in cooperation with God's blessings of fertility. NFP is the only means of birth control which accounts for the procreative aspect of sex, and this is why couples who are looking for a form of birth control should use NFP, and not to mention all the other benefits of using NFP. I'm going to read quickly from this website. Why do NFP couples have such low divorce rates? The low divorce rate among couples practicing NFP reflects a combination of factors. First, couples with strong relationships may be more likely than other couples to choose to practice NFP. After all, NFP depends on some of the same virtues as marriage itself: commitment, communication, consideration, and self-control. Couples who reject NFP as too much trouble or too restrictive all too often turn out to be the same couples who ultimately find the demands of marriage itself to be too much to handle. Second, NFP helps strengthen marital relationships. On the most basic level, since the spouses are not consistently sexually available to another, it keeps them from taking the other for granted. Often women rightly complain that the use of contraception has lowered their sense of worth. Now, I put this link in the description of the video if you want to keep reading. But basically, there are so many good benefits to using NFP, and not to mention, it's the only moral form of birth control that we know of. So I hope this clears up some misconceptions. I hope this answers the questions. And if you have any more questions, please leave it in a comment below. So thank you very much for listening.